Let's pick up where we left off in this greatest of stories, following Jesus through his final days in Jerusalem, learning alongside the disciples that his blood must be poured out for many, and that the good news of his resurrection must be proclaimed to the whole world. Join us as we journey with Jesus to the cross and beyond the Gospel of Mark.
When they were choosing symbols to represent a movement, Christianity definitely has the most disturbing of all. Let me explain. Like if you see a six-sided star, the Star of David, you know that it's a symbol for Judaism. Those interlocking triangles represent the connection of God, the triangle pointing down, and humanity, the triangle pointing up. Or if you see a crescent moon and a star, you think of Islam. You see the Dharma wheel, it symbolizes Buddhism. There are some other movements, not just religious ones, that have identifying symbols that go with them. The peace sign for the hippies, the recycle symbol for environmentalism, the Jolly Roger is a symbol for pirate culture. I also discovered that it's a symbol for underground workplace rebellion, just so you know. Then you have some more obscure ones like the hipster culture, which is symbolized by the mustache and fedora hat, or the avocado is the symbol of the veganism, because nothing inspires dietary minimalism like a $15 piece of toast. Anyway, we could go all day with these, and this may be the last lighthearted moment in a very serious message today, because we arrive at Christianity's shocking symbol, the cross. And we wear it constantly. We display it liberally around our houses, or use it for tattoos, or see it on hospitals and churches. And I wonder if we've lost the wonder because it's become too familiar to us. Early Christians within the first 300 years of the church would probably be appalled by our casualness with the cross. In fact, in those days, it was against the rules of the early church fathers for any Christians to depict or display a cross. Why? Well, because they'd seen them used. There was nothing glamorous to them, nothing artistic, nothing romantic, nothing even spiritual about it, nothing worth remembering at all. It was something that you didn't even want to look at, something you would certainly hide your kids' eyes from. It was the symbol of a shameful execution. And the Romans, they would crucify thousands of slaves right along the Via Appia, the main thoroughfare, bodies hanging by the roadside that were like billboards to citizens and foreigners alike. And the message was this: don't mess with Rome. Near Jerusalem, outside the city at times, there would be maybe hundreds of crucifixions in a single day. So to wear a cross around your neck as jewelry would be like us walking around with a pendant of an electric chair. Pretty morbid. And so why did the cross become the symbol of Christianity? How did a tool of torture come to symbolize this movement of hope? Well, it's not a celebration of widespread execution or torture that we display. No, the cross points only to the importance of one history-changing, single, solitary execution, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Apart from his crucifixion, there would be no lasting importance of this symbol of the cross. That symbol would mean nothing to us. It would have died with history, but instead, the cross is everywhere. It's on top of chapels and colleges and athletic stadiums. It's in your homes. It's on your brooches. Why? Because this symbol of torture became our symbol of hope because of what happened on one Friday afternoon outside Jerusalem. And what was actually accomplished on that cross for you and for me might just floor you. And that's what we're going to explore today. We're in Mark chapter 15, and we're down to our third to last message in this 2-year journey through Mark's gospel. And it's with some sadness that, we're starting to wind this up. I feel a kinship with Mark, almost like we've given him a seat at the table to lead our church through a very important time in our history as we've considered what true discipleship looks like, what it truly means to follow Jesus in the real world. And I'm so grateful for his writings, and I can't wait to personally thank him someday in heaven. Today's passage is quite a text. A lot of skeptics discount the Bible as myth or folklore. They say it's like Aesop's fables or Mother Goose. Nice stories with good lessons, but certainly these stories are not pointing to any real events. And if that's you today, if you're a skeptic, if you've discounted the Bible based on maybe what others have said, but never really read it yourself, or maybe the last time you read it was back at CCD or something like that, can I urge you to give the Bible another shot? Start with the Gospels. And what you'll find doesn't read like folklore. It doesn't read like myth. Look at the gritty details. The Gospels are packed full of specifics, especially this crucifixion scene where our story almost shifts into a lower gear. It's like we go into slow motion. This is no fairy tale. Mark is showing us through his style of writing that Jesus Christ was crucified in the blood and dirt of real history. And so look at Mark chapter 15, verse 21. It says, "And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry the cross." Now, the way Mark introduces Simon of Cyrene suggests that he'd maybe become a well-known Christian. His sons, Alexander and Rufus, they were likely known to Mark's readers. Rufus is possibly even the same man that Paul mentions as a church leader in Rome. So Mark's casual reference to these real people is kind of his way of saying, listen, don't believe me that this happened. Ask these guys. They were there. Here are their names. Here are their addresses. Go ask them. This is not how fairy tales are written. And in addition to introducing us to Simon and his sons, Mark also wants us to feel the weight of Jesus' torture. Jesus was too weak to carry his cross because of the beatings. And so Simon becomes a living picture of what Jesus has been teaching throughout his ministry. True disciples must take up the cross and follow. Look at verse 22. "And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it." Once again, we have this historical detail of the setting of the crucifixion. Mark tells us the exact spot where Jesus hung on the cross. Again, the point to his original readers was, here's the spot where it happened. Feel free to go visit for yourself. And notice in verse 23, Jesus refused this narcotic drink that was open to wine mixed with myrrh. It was offered to dull his senses. And it just shows us Jesus' voluntary sacrifice. He went to the cross fully conscious. He chose to endure the full force of the agony of the cross. And due to his character, he wants to go through the crucifixion in complete control of his senses. There's another interesting angle to Jesus' decision to refuse this drink. He may actually be keeping his vow to his disciples from the Last Supper, where he said he wouldn't drink the wine again until his reception in the kingdom of God. Now look at verse 24. I've said from the beginning of Mark's gospel that I appreciate the brevity that Mark uses, none starker than here. He says, and they crucified him. And so here we are at the climax of the story, and it appears that Mark is out of words. Suddenly, all the details and all that we're left with, there's nothing left, and just thousands of questions. One simple statement, and they crucified him. I think the reason that he offers no details, no more description, is because everybody in his original audience had seen a crucifixion. Mark didn't want to speak of it. They'd seen it. But we haven't. We've never heard the agonizing screams. We've never heard the flesh being ripped, we've never smelled the blood or the death in the air. I can see why Mark didn't need to go into detail. The Romans were masters of painful execution. Jesus hung by spikes through his wrists, which supported his whole body weight, making each breath an excruciating effort. And when hanging from the cross, breathing would become nearly impossible without pushing up on one's feet, which is why the Romans drove spikes through the feet as well. This cruel design meant that a death that could have taken minutes due to suffocation would now take hours of agony. This modern word that we use, excruciating, literally means from the cross. Remember, crucifixions were billboards. They were supposed to make a statement. The goal wasn't to just get the person to die. There were far more efficient ways of doing that. The goal was to torture in such a way as to send a message. Don't mess with Rome. And so for 6 hours, Jesus experienced this torture, his raw, scourged back scraping against rough wood with every labored breath, all with no relief from his pain. We see back in verse 24, it says, "And they divided his garments among them, casting lots for them, to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him." The third hour is around 9 a.m. He would finally die at 3 p.m. The division of garments is something that the soldiers would customarily do. It's kind of the equivalent of our modern movies. If you watch a movie where a person kills another person, then goes rifling through their pockets for their valuables. But it's also this moment of no return. Jesus was finally, totally, and completely delivered over into the hands of the enemies. Years of scheming and plotting, and they finally got him. From the cross, Jesus would go on to make 7 brief statements. And when you consider how hard it was for him to breathe, you can understand why they were so short. Look at verse 26. It says, "In the inscription of the charge against him read, 'The King of the Jews.'" This inscription shows us that for Mark, the cross is the coronation of the royal Messiah. Remember, through the gospel, we've seen what we've called the messianic secret, where Jesus would do something amazing, an amazing miracle, and he would tell the people to keep it quiet because his time had not yet come. And then in these final days, Jesus has been kind of more overtly declaring his messianic kingship, his ride into Jerusalem on the donkey, receiving the worship of the crowds, his questioning before Pilate, basically saying, yeah, I'm the king, just not the kind you think I am. And now a sign above his head, which, although it's meant as mockery, this is the most accurate statement so far about his identity. He is the king. And this is his royal coronation as the Messiah that all of Jewish history has been pointing toward. It's certainly not what anybody expected. Look at verse 27. "And with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, 'Ah, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross.' And so also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. So now we see that the mocking and the taunting. This was already a shameful and embarrassing way to die, but now everyone was joining in. The leaders, random passersby, even the other criminals on the cross. This response is placing Jesus now lower than even the common criminals. Even the petty thieves are making fun of him. And what Mark wants us to see here is that not only did Jesus die, but he was shamed. He was ridiculed. You have to understand that this was a shame and honor culture. And so in a shame culture, like your name and your reputation are everything. Having a good name was the way that you lived on and the way that your family lived on and the way that your legacy lived on. And crucifixion was so devastating because not only were they destroying your life, they were destroying your name. And to have your name be a laughingstock in that culture was essentially like going to hell for all eternity. It was the worst possible fate. And Mark wants us to know, for Jesus, it was the lowest shame. Why? Here's the message. Jesus took the worst of it so that we might know, even the most shameful among us, that he took our shame upon ourselves. He had his name destroyed so that we could be given a new name, son or daughter of God, forever. But there's another subtle twist here in our text. Not only did this mocking sign, the sign that was above Jesus' head, accidentally tell us the truth about who he was, but the mockers in the story become unwitting heralds of the true significance of the crucifixion. These mockers are actually speaking unconscious prophecies about Jesus. They're accidentally telling the truth. And I think this is such a genius twist in Mark's gospel. They say, save yourself and come down. Well, not to spoil the ending, but that's exactly what's about to happen. They say, come down so that we may see and believe. Well, that's about to happen too. It's going to be fulfilled throughout the whole book of Acts. Many will see and many will believe, and the church will explode throughout the world. But right now, before we get ahead of ourselves, the scene is still very grim. Look at verse 33. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, behold, he is calling Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, Let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry, and he breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." There were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, the younger, and of Joseph and of Salome. And when he was in Galilee, they followed him and they ministered to him. And there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. Church, here's what I want us to see today. Jesus Christ died on the cross. Few historians would contest that claim. But Jesus didn't just die. He did something far more profound. Here's today's big idea. Jesus experienced the judgment day that we deserved. This wasn't any old death. It was a death that changed history. And here's what I want you to see. I want you to see three powerful ways Jesus transformed our relationship with God on the cross. I want to connect each to what happened on Golgotha that day, beginning with the darkness falling, a cosmic signal that something unprecedented was taking place. Here's the first thing, that as darkness fell, Jesus absorbed God's wrath. Verse 33 gives us this breathtaking detail that from noon to 3 p.m. on Good Friday, there was total darkness. Can you imagine just going about your day and the bright sunlight at noon, and then for no reason at all, utter darkness? We're meant to feel the weight of the wrath of God and the seriousness of the sin of the world. In the Bible, darkness always represents God's judgment. And when it says darkness fell over the whole land, this means that judgment has come upon the whole human race, the whole earth, dark at the same time. The prophet Amos predicted this as he speaks on behalf of God. He says, "In that day, I'll make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight." This is the cup of wrath that Jesus prayed would pass from him in the garden. The wrath of God is about to be poured out on humanity, and Jesus is about to absorb every ounce of it. You can't understand the cross unless you understand that all human beings stand guilty before God and deserve punishment before God and deserve the wrath of God. Our modern culture resists this concept of guilt. That culture tells us, like, you decide what's right. You speak your truth. You live your truth. You don't let anyone, make you feel guilty. Find your inner light and then you'll be good. But this promise of finding yourself has led so many people to just only deeper levels of anxiety and loneliness. Looking inward for truth and looking inward for meaning leaves you emptier than before. When the Bible talks about our human condition and it says we're sinners under the weight of guilt, it's actually freeing because it acknowledges that this thing that we already know, that our moral failings are too big for us to solve alone. We need something, we need someone outside ourselves. And the Bible says that there is a truth and that there is a moral code and that there is a right and that there is a wrong and that there is a God and that there are things bigger than you. And when you don't reach those standards, yes, there is guilt, but there is also hope. And you don't have to solve it yourself. You don't have to figure it out yourself. It's too heavy for you. And so Jesus died to take the wrath of God that your guilt deserved. And I'd just ask you, when was the last time you truly reflected on what it cost Jesus to absorb God's judgment for your sin? Like when you remember this great exchange, how does it change the way you approach your guilt? Jesus absorbed God's wrath as darkness fell over the whole land. But the darkness outside was just a shadow of a deeper darkness Jesus was experiencing inside. The second powerful way that he transformed our relationship with God is that as the cry echoed, Jesus endured God's absence. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is one of the most horrifying and beautiful questions ever spoken. The word cry here, it means Jesus screamed or he shrieked. The words are written in Aramaic, even though Mark is writing to a Greek-speaking audience. Why the difference in language? Well, remember, this is an eyewitness memory. Those people who heard this cry probably never forgot it for their whole lives. The theological word for this is the cry of dereliction. God turned his back on his son, Jesus, because in this moment, Jesus had become sin. He had taken on himself the sin of the world, and God in his holiness cannot coexist in the presence of sin. And you can hear the intimacy in the cry, my God, it's a cry of intimacy. And this is the only moment in eternity past or in the present or in eternity future where Jesus wouldn't know the intimate fellowship of his Father. This was by far the most painful moment of his whole incarnation for Jesus. He dreaded this separation from his Father. What you need to see, though, is that this moment is the crescendo of God's love. It's important to understand that Jesus is quoting the opening line from Psalm 22. This is a prayer, a hymn that the Israelites had sung in corporate worship for 1,000 years. And by citing this opening line of this hymn, Jesus is invoking the entire psalm. This is a practice that was common in oral ancient cultures. This wasn't just for the theological elite. Ordinary people would recognize over 20 details. They'd fill in the blanks from Psalm 22. These details that aligned precisely what was happening before their eyes on the cross. Psalm 22 talks about the mocking, the piercing hands, the feet, the divided garments. And what begins as a cry of abandonment in this psalm will ultimately transform into a declaration of God's victory and salvation for the nations. See, Jesus wasn't just expressing anguish. He was declaring that in this moment, he was the fulfillment of God's good plan. He was the exclamation point on God's promise of love and faithfulness and ultimate redemption of his people. This psalm begins by lamenting the separation from God that Jesus is experiencing right now, and in a small way that all believers have experienced. He says this, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. And by night, but I find no rest. I am scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him. This is the psalm that Jesus is invoking on the cross, the psalm that begins with total anguish. But by the ending of this psalm, the tune has totally changed. And so I believe that Jesus isn't just invoking the beginning, but he's pointing us to the ending. Mark shows us from the cross that Jesus yielded his spirit. No one took it. He's showing us one more time that to the very end, Jesus was in total control. He had a purpose in front of him, and he was fulfilling it. And what was that purpose? Well, Jesus was in his darkest hour, and he's asking, God, why have you forsaken me? And it's not just a quote from Psalm 22, and it's not just a rhetorical question. It's a question that has an answer. So why? Why did God forsake Jesus in that moment? And the answer is people, humanity, you, me. It's us. Jesus was forsaken by God so that we would never have to be. The judgment that should have fallen on us fell instead on Jesus so that we could be in a relationship with him. Jesus was separated from the Father so you would never have to be. How does knowing that change your perspective when you start to feel abandoned or alone? You see, when you picture Jesus on the cross losing the infinite love of his Father out of the infinite love for you, it will melt any hardness of heart that has built up in you. And so we've learned as the darkness fell, Jesus absorbed God's wrath. As the cry echoed, Jesus endured God's absence. His cry of abandonment and in the utter darkness wasn't the end. It wasn't the end of this story, though light was about to break through in a dramatic way. Here's the third transformation Jesus' death accomplished for us. That as the curtain ripped, Jesus ushered us into God's presence. Two things happen in verses 38 and 39 that show us how we have unparalleled access to the presence of God. The ripping of the curtain and the confession of the centurion. Tim Keller says it this way in his book, The King's Cross. He said, the curtain was what separated the people from the presence of God. Only the holiest man, that's the high priest, from the holiest nation, that's Israel, on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, could enter the Holy of Holies. And even then, he had to bring a blood sacrifice to make atonement for the sins of the people. And this huge curtain, it was as thick as a wall. It separated the Holy of Holies, where the Shekinah glory of God dwelled, from the rest of the temple. The curtain communicated loud and clear that it is impossible for anyone sinful, anyone in spiritual darkness, to come into God's presence. And so when Jesus died, the veil was torn, it says, from top to bottom, just to make clear who did it. The barrier was gone for good. This was God's way of saying, this is the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. The way is now open to approach me. Anyone who comes to God through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ has full, open access to the Father. The barrier is gone for good. And just to make sure we got the point, Mark shows us the first person who benefits from this newfound access, a Roman centurion. His confession says, truly this man was the Son of God. This confession takes us all the way back to where we began, full circle 2 years ago, back to Mark chapter 1, verse 1, where Mark introduces us to our Savior, referring to him as Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And up to this point in his gospel, no human being has figured it out. The first one to do so is not a disciple. It's not one in the crowds who had heard him teaching on the mountainside or by the seashore. It wasn't a family member. It wasn't a friend. It's a Roman soldier, an enemy. Maybe with some of Jesus' blood still on his sword from piercing his side, or maybe holding one of Jesus' garments in his hand that he had bid on for a good deal. And while the disciples have fled, this soldier becomes the latest in a long line of what we've called ordinary heroes in Mark. A Roman soldier offers the first true confession of faith, paving the way for the universal access to the presence of God. Guys, no matter who you are or what you've done, Christ's perfect work on the cross can be applied to your sin. Now, back to Psalm 22. The psalm whose first line Jesus quoted from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Remember I said that the first part of it is pretty depressing. But there's a second part, and I want to fill in the blanks for you, because this is the way that every Jewish man or woman would have mentally filled in the blanks as they watched him die as he said those words. In fact, the tune of the hymn that went along with these words might have been stuck in their head for just a moment. Psalm 22:26 says this, that the poor will eat and be satisfied. They who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. And all the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive, posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord, and they will proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn. Listen, for he has done it. He has done it. He has done it. Our Jesus has done it. This is the promise of redemption for our sin, for every thought, for every offense, for every wickedness, for every bit of shame, for every lie, for every stumble, for every foolish fantasy, every petty offense, every sin that was ever an offense to Christ, to God. All that separated me from him was crucified on that cross with Jesus. He has done it. Every act of injustice, every angry lashing out, every sin imaginable that an accuser could bring before God against you, Jesus is right there at his right hand. He's saying, no, I paid for that one. No, I paid for that. I paid for that one. This is my adopted son. They're perfect. He's spotless. He's pure. He's holy. He's mine. This is my child. She's mine. And Christ on the cross has ushered us into the very presence of God. And sin no longer separates us, so that you and I are no longer under wrath, but we are under mercy. Why did Jesus die? So that he might absorb God's wrath and endure God's absence. Listen, so that he might ultimately usher us into God's presence, so that you and I might be able to live in restored fellowship with our Creator. Thanks be to God. And with this kind of access, can I ask, what barriers are you still keeping between yourself and God's presence, even though the curtain has been torn? Like, what would change in your life if you truly lived with an unhindered, open access to the Father? Jesus has made a way. He has done it. And as we consider these three profound transformations that Jesus accomplished on the cross, we're left with one clear response for today's next step. Will you practice gratitude for the cross? Let me give you a couple ways. I know some of you keep maybe a gratitude journal. Why don't you just flood that thing with thanksgiving for what Jesus has done? Or maybe this week in your chair time, write a letter to Jesus expressing your gratitude for the cross that maybe you'll read privately on Easter morning before you come and celebrate his resurrection at church. Or maybe read through Psalm 22 or Isaiah 53 is another one, or one of the gospel crucifixion accounts, and just meditate on that passage all week for 5 minutes a day or something, ending with a prayer of thanks. Or maybe when you're facing a temptation or feeling condemned this week, would you pause and visualize Jesus taking that specific sin to the cross and then express your gratitude out loud? Like, there are 100 ways to do this, but practice gratitude for the cross. Guys, 2,000 years ago, the Son of God hung between heaven and earth, taking a judgment you and I deserved so that we might have a relationship with God that we could never earn. And so today I invite you to pause before rushing back into the noise of this life. Take one action this week that acknowledges what happened on that cross. And when you feel condemned, remember, Jesus absorbed God's wrath so that you could be declared innocent. And when you feel abandoned, remember, Jesus endured God's absence so that you would never have to. And when you pray, remember, Jesus ripped the curtain so that you could approach God directly as his beloved child. The cross stands as God's eternal statement. I would rather die than live without you. So as we make final preparations for Easter this year, let's recognize that the judgment day Jesus experienced wasn't just history, it was personal. He took your place. He bore your judgment. He opened your access to God. The cross changed everything. I love you guys.